The most profound betrayal I ever experienced didn't come with shouting or a dramatic confrontation. It arrived silently on a Wednesday afternoon while I was sitting in a classified security debriefing at the Treasury headquarters 40 miles from home. My phone, set to silent, buzzed against the gleaming mahogany of the conference table. A single urgent notification from my home's security network. I slid the phone into my lap beneath the table, unlocked it, and pulled up the live camera feed. The air hitched in my throat. The intruder wasn't a stranger. It was my sister, Sophie. She was in my private study. She was on her knees before my reinforced, floor-bolted safe, and a self-satisfied smile was playing on her lips as she carefully pulled out the tamper-evident federal envelopes, one after another. She wasn't frantic. She wasn't scared. She looked righteous. I watched, frozen, as she stacked $750,000 in secured government bonds onto my antique desk as if she were sorting junk mail. I made no sound. My face remained a mask of professional calm. The analyst beside me was droning on about emerging market risks. I pushed my chair back, the movement soundless on the thick carpet, and stepped out into the quiet, empty corridor. I dialed the secure internal line. My hand was rock steady. My voice, when I spoke, was a low, even whisper. "This is Analyst Evans. I'm reporting a Category Alpha breach at my primary residence. The perpetrator is a close relation. Before we get into the heart of it, please do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from today." My name is Clara Evans. I'm 32 years old. I'm a financial analyst for the United States Department of the Treasury. My work is a world of quiet precision, governed by unbendable rules. I track illicit money flows. I enforce complex regulations. I uncover hidden patterns in oceans of data. My existence is built on the simple principle of action and consequence. My family, on the other hand, was built on a foundation of pure fantasy. To any outsider, we were the picture-perfect suburban dream. We lived in a sprawling colonial, in a leafy, affluent neighborhood. My father, Robert, was a senior partner at a respected accounting firm. My mother, Helen, was a prominent figure in local charity circles. Our annual Christmas cards were a masterclass in domestic bliss. In every photograph, we were a constellation of flawless smiles. My father's arm would be securely around my mother. My sister, Sophie, would be the radiant centerpiece. And I would be there, off to the side, a quiet and tidy accessory. We looked content. We looked utterly normal. It was a complete and total fabrication. Inside the walls of that house, affection wasn't an emotion. It was a resource allocated by rank. It was a rigid pecking order, and I was nowhere near the top. My sister, Sophie, was the star that the rest of our family universe revolved around. She was effervescent, boisterous, and effortlessly charming. Her fiery red hair was a beautiful mess, and she had a laugh that could stop traffic. When Sophie entered a room, the entire atmosphere shifted, bending toward her light. My parents didn't just love her. They worshipped her. They were willfully blind to her flaws, and Sophie had them in abundance. She was reckless. She was profoundly selfish. And she was saturated with a sense of entitlement so deep it was part of her DNA. Growing up, Sophie was the one who broke things. I was the one held responsible for failing to prevent the breakage. I'll never forget my final project for 7th grade history. It was a meticulously crafted diorama of an ancient Roman villa. I poured weeks into it. I sculpted tiny clay senators and painted intricate frescoes on the walls. I used real moss for the gardens. I was immensely proud of it. It was a guaranteed A+. The evening before it was due, Sophie had her friends over, and they were running amok in my room. I told them to be careful. I placed the project on the highest shelf of my bookcase for safekeeping. When I returned from the kitchen with snacks, it was on the floor, obliterated. The clay figures were dust. The balsa wood walls were splintered. Sophie was just laughing, a careless hand covering her mouth. "Oops, it was an accident," she chirped, her eyes already scanning for the next source of amusement. Tears welled in my eyes. My mother heard my choked sobs and came rushing in. She didn't even glance at the ruined project, her entire focus locked onto Sophie. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice dripping with concern. "Clara's yelling at me," Sophie whimpered, her face instantly crumpling into a mask of theatrical sorrow. I barely touched it, and it just fell. She's being so horrible to me. My mother's gaze swung to me, her eyes like chips of ice. "Clara, why would you upset your sister like that? You know she didn't mean it. It's just a school project. You can build another one." "It's due tomorrow," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Well, perhaps you should have been more careful with where you put it," my father added, his voice booming from the doorway. "Don't punish Sophie for your own carelessness." I received a failing grade. Sophie was taken out for a consolation Sunday. That was the law of our household. I was the other one, the quiet daughter, the invisible daughter. So I became the overachiever. I earned flawless grades. I obeyed every single rule without question. I gained admission to a top-tier university. I secured a coveted position in the federal government. I did all of this with the foolish, persistent belief that one day they would finally have to acknowledge me. That one day, the weight of my accomplishments would finally make me as valuable as Sophie's effortless charisma. It was a fool's errand. When I graduated from my master's program summa cum laude, my father gave me a brisk handshake. "That's nice, Clara," he said, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more interesting to talk to. "Just remember, nobody likes a know-it-all." When I was hired by the Treasury, my mother's only remark was, "Oh, that sounds dreadfully dull. Why can't you find a fun job like Sophie?" Sophie was a real estate agent. She had married her college boyfriend, Mark, a kind but hopelessly passive man who was utterly under her thumb. They had 2 beautiful children and lived in a palatial house that my parents had largely financed. Sophie was cherished. I was tolerated. My job was my sanctuary. It was the only domain where my quiet, meticulous nature was celebrated as a virtue. At work, I wasn't the invisible daughter. I was Analyst Evans. I was trusted with highly sensitive national security information. The bonds in my safe were, well, I can't discuss the specifics of the case, but they were critical. Their monetary value was $750,000, but they represented far more than cash. They were evidence. They were leverage. They were my direct responsibility. I kept them stored in a government-spec, floor-bolted safe inside my apartment, a safe whose existence I believed was a complete secret. My family never understood my job. More accurately, they never tried. To them, my classified work was just some eccentric, secretive hobby. It wasn't real life. Real life was Sophie's children's soccer games, Sophie's new luxury car, Sophie's boisterous holiday dinners. Eventually, I gave up trying to explain. I gave up trying to be seen. I just worked. I built my life an hour away from them in the heart of Washington, D.C. I constructed it with layers of security, rules, and encrypted protocols. I built it to be a fortress against the casual destruction of my family. I built it to be a fortress against Sophie. I was about to learn, in the most brutal way imaginable, that no lock is strong enough to keep out someone who genuinely believes they are entitled to everything you have. The betrayal didn't begin the day Sophie cracked my safe. It began decades earlier in a home that taught one daughter she was a goddess and the other that she was nothing but a shadow. It happened 3 weeks before the theft. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Family dinner night. Please come. Mom's making her famous lasagna. We miss you so much, complete with a string of heart emojis. I stared at the screen, a familiar dread coiling in my stomach. I never wanted to go. I always left feeling smaller, more diminished. There was always some casual cutting remark, a little jab about my Spartan apartment, my single status, my serious job. But there was also that small, hopelessly naive part of me that still held out hope. The part of me that wanted to believe the effusive texts and the saccharine emojis. The part of me that, damn it all, really missed my mother's lasagna. So I drove out to my parents' house, the same one I'd grown up in. Sophie's gleaming white SUV was already parked ostentatiously in the driveway. Inside, the atmosphere was a cacophony of forced warmth and noise. Sophie's 2 kids were tearing through the house like a miniature tornado. Sophie enveloped me in a hug that was just a little too tight, her perfume cloying. Clara, you made it! We were worried your top-secret spy mission would keep you away. Hi, Sophie, I said, extricating myself. Hi, Dad. Hi, Mom. Clara, you look tired, my mother observed without looking up from stirring a pot on the stove. Don't they feed you in that city? The lasagna smells amazing, Mom, I offered, my default peacemaking response. Dinner was a carbon copy of every family dinner I'd ever endured. It was loud, filled with cheap wine and performative laughter. My brother-in-law Mark launched into a painfully detailed story about a difficult house closing. My father pontificated about his golf handicap. Sophie talked endlessly about her children's achievements. Everyone laughed on cue. I sat there picking at my food, the designated audience. So, what about you, Clara? My father finally asked, turning to me as if just noticing my presence. Catch any big-time criminals lately? Work is going well, Dad. We just wrapped up a major operation. Oh, that's nice, he replied, his attention already swiveling back to Mark to discuss the housing market. I felt the familiar dull sting of being erased, the feeling of invisibility. I just concentrated on chewing my food. Then, Sophie clapped her hands together with theatrical flair. Oh, I nearly forgot. I have a huge surprise. She beamed at me, a wide, bright, terrifyingly fake smile. It's for the kids, of course, but it's all thanks to my brilliant, super-rich sister. I furrowed my brow. What are you talking about? Sophie reached down beside her chair. She produced a designer handbag. And from that bag, she pulled out my federal files. My blood turned to ice in my veins. They weren't just any files. They were the sealed, tamper-evident federal envelopes from my safe. They bore official government markings. They were the $750,000 in bearer bonds. She waved them in the air as if they were winning lottery tickets. I found your little nest egg, sis, she announced to the whole room. My parents' faces instantly lit up with greedy curiosity. I was at your apartment last week, Sophie explained breezily, watering your plants since you always forget. And I was looking for a vase for some flowers I brought you and, well, I saw the safe in your study. You really need to work on your passwords, by the way. Buddy 1995, the name of our childhood dog? Seriously, Clara? I wasn't even listening. A roaring sound filled my ears. She had been in my safe? How could she know the combination? It wasn't Buddy 1995. It was, oh God, it was the date of our grandmother's birthday, a date Sophie knew. She had guessed. She had actively tried to break in. Sophie, what did you do? I managed to say, my voice dangerously low. I opened it, silly. And I found all this. She laughed. a high, tinkling sound that made my skin crawl. I mean, my goodness, Clara. All this money just collecting dust. You don't even have a family to spend it on. My mother clapped her hands together in delight. Oh, Clara, you've been saving. How wonderful. I told Mom and Dad about it, Sophie continued, her voice syrupy sweet. And we all had the most wonderful idea. It's the perfect amount for a college fund for my kids. Isn't that just so thoughtful, everyone? Aunt Clara is paying for their education. My parents were beaming, positively glowing with pride. Clara, that is so generous of you, my mother cried, her eyes actually filling with tears. What a wonderful, selfless gift for your sister and your niece and nephew. I just stared at them, the room tilting on its axis. They believed it. They actually truly believed it. No, I said, my voice shaking with a rage so profound it felt like a physical illness. Sophie's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. What do you mean, no? Give those back to me, I said, my voice rising as I pushed my chair back and stood up. Don't be so dramatic, Clara. It's for the children. Where did you get those? My voice was barely a whisper, but it sliced through the cheerful din of the dining room. Sophie's face hardened, the charming mask dissolving. I told you, you're safe. You really should have picked a better hiding place. Those are not savings, Sophie, I said, my voice gaining a cold, hard strength I didn't know I possessed. Those are not mine to give away. They are secured federal assets. They are evidence in an active classified investigation. What you have just done, that is a major felony. My father shot to his feet. Clara, you will not use that tone in this house. You are making a scene. Dad, you don't understand what she's done. I understand perfectly, he boomed, his face turning a deep red. You are being incredibly selfish. Your sister needs this money. Those children are your family. You have a good government job. You can just save more. This is what family is for. We support one another. Support? I looked at him, then at my mother, who was nodding her fervent agreement. I looked at Sophie, who was clutching $750,000 of government evidence with a smirk on her face. They didn't see me. They didn't see my career, my oath, my entire life. They saw an ATM. They saw a resource to be plundered for Sophie's benefit. You don't get it, I said, the fight draining out of me. You will never get it, Sophie shrugged, already losing interest. See? It's fine. I'll just hang on to these for the kids. Get it all set up. She started to tuck the envelopes back into her designer purse. I just stared at her, at all of them. For my entire life, I had been the good daughter, the responsible one, the quiet one. And in a single evening, they had casually stolen my life's work and gifted it to my sister like a party favor. They had made me an accessory to a federal crime. I didn't say another word. I turned on my heel. I picked up my coat and purse from the hall chair. Clara, don't you dare walk out on this family, my father warned. Clara, we're about to have dessert, my mother called, her voice laced with confusion. I walked out of the dining room. I walked to the front door. My heels made a sharp, definitive click-clack on the hardwood floor. Each step was a full stop. The end of a sentence, the end of a chapter, the end of my family as I knew it. I opened the front door and walked into the freezing night air. I didn't look back. I got into my car. My hands were trembling so badly I couldn't fit the key into the ignition. I just sat there in the oppressive darkness of my parents' driveway. I looked at the house. It was a beacon of warmth and light. Through the dining room window, I could see them. They were still gathered around the table. My father was cutting a cake. My mother was pouring coffee. Sophie was laughing, her head thrown back. They had already forgotten I was ever there. My empty chair was meaningless. My absence was their normal. I was the ghost at their feast, and now the ghost had finally departed. A wave of pure, cold, clarifying anger washed over me. It was so intense it burned away the hurt, the confusion, the decades of quiet pain. They hadn't just dismissed me. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had put my entire life on the line. My security clearance, my career, my future, everything I had painstakingly built for myself, far away from their toxic orbit. They had reached into my secure private world and ripped it to shreds, all to feed Sophie's insatiable, yawning entitlement. And they didn't even care. They didn't even have the capacity to understand the magnitude of what they had done. They thought those bonds were just money. They thought my job was a silly game. They thought the United States government was just some big, anonymous piggy bank they could raid. They were about to learn how wrong they were. A small, wounded part of me wanted to cry. It wanted to storm back inside, to scream, to break plates, to force them, finally, to listen to me. But I knew it was futile. I'd been trying to make them listen for 32 years. They were deaf to my voice. Their ears were tuned only to the frequency of Sophie. I took a single, deep, cleansing breath. The shaking in my hands ceased. They became steady. I knew exactly what I had to do. I didn't call the local police. This was far beyond their jurisdiction. This was my world, my rules. I pulled out my encrypted work phone. I scrolled to a single name, Director Michael Morales, my direct supervisor. He was a decent man, fair, brutally honest, and completely by the book. He understood rules. More importantly, he understood consequences. I pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring. Morales. His voice was sharp, all business. Even at this hour, Director Morales, it's Clara Evans. I apologize for calling you at home. Evans. What's wrong? You sound calm. That's never a good sign. I have a Category Alpha breach to report, I said. My voice was flat, devoid of all emotion, just the facts. There was a weighted silence on the other end of the line. He knew exactly what that designation meant. Explain. The assets, the bonds from the Nightingale case, the $750,000. What about them, Evans? He asked, his voice hardening to steel. They're gone. They've been compromised, stolen from my residential secure storage. Who, Evans? Who had access? I closed my eyes, and all I could see was my sister's smirking face as she waved the envelopes. I saw my parents clapping. I took a breath. My sister, Sophie Evans Albright. Another long, heavy silence. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. The paperwork, the internal investigation, the potential end of my career. Are you certain? Yes, sir. She has them in her possession as we speak. She admitted it freely, bragged about it, in fact. Where is she now? At my parents' house, 455 Willow Creek Lane, Northgate. I recited my childhood address without thinking. Does she understand what they are? No. She thinks it's a personal savings fund. She and my parents. They believe it's money for her children's college education. Jesus Christ, Evans, he sighed, a rare crack in his professional armor. Okay, relationship to the perpetrator? My sister, I repeated. The word tasted like poison. Understood. His voice was all official protocol now. Analyst Evans, what is your current location? Are you secure? I'm in my vehicle. I am not at the residence. Good. Remain in your vehicle. A federal response team is being dispatched to that address immediately. Do not engage. Do not make contact with the suspect or any other individuals at the location. Do not return to the house. Our agents will secure the assets. Do you understand your instructions? Yes, I whispered. And Evans? Yes, sir? You did the right thing. He hung up. I sat in the pitch-black car for another minute. The machine was now in motion. The invisible, powerful wheels I had set spinning were already turning. Treasury agents, federal alerts. By the time I had ended the call, the serial numbers on those bonds were already being flagged as stolen federal property across a dozen databases. There was no rewind button. I had made my choice. I had chosen the law. I had chosen my world. My family had been judging me my entire life. My quiet nature, my serious job, my personal choices. They had judged me and consistently found me wanting. They had found me useful only as a line of credit for my sister. Now it was my turn to judge. I started the car, the engine a low, comforting hum. I put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway, slowly and deliberately. I didn't spare the house another glance. The long, silent drive back to my empty, secure apartment in D.C. felt different this time. It wasn't lonely. It was final. I felt numb. I felt cold. But for the very first time in my entire adult life, I felt free. The lie was over. The perfect family was about to shatter. And I was the one who had finally, after all these years, thrown the stone. I arrived back at my apartment just after 11 p.m. The city lights twinkled below, indifferent. My apartment was dark. I didn't bother with the lights. I walked straight to the living room and sank onto my sofa. My safe, in the study down the hall, was open, empty, violated. I didn't need to see it. I could feel its gaping emptiness from where I sat. I sat there in the gloom. I didn't cry, I didn't pace. I simply waited. I knew the call would come. The government works with terrifying speed when its own integrity is at stake. At 11:52 p.m., my personal cell phone rang, its screen lighting up the dark room. The caller ID was one word: Dad. My heart gave a single, painful thud against my ribs. I let it ring 3 times, then I answered. My hand was perfectly steady. "Hello," I said. "Clara, what in God's name did you do?" His voice was a raw, strangled roar. I had never in my entire life heard my father sound like that. It was pure, undiluted panic. In the background, I could hear my mother's hysterical shrieking, punctuated by a calm, authoritative male voice saying, "Sir, you need to step away from the phone." "Dad, what's happening?" I asked, my voice a placid counterpoint to his chaos. I knew exactly what was happening, but I needed to hear him say it. There are federal agents here in the house," he yelled, his voice breaking into a sob. A deep, ugly, gut-wrenching sound. "They have guns, Clara. They have vests. Oh my God. Oh God, Clara. They're putting Sophie in handcuffs." I closed my eyes, and the scene played out in my mind's eye with perfect clarity. I saw the agents in their dark blue tactical vests, their faces impassive and professional. My mother collapsed on the plush beige carpet of the living room, her hand clapped over her mouth. My father, red-faced and impotent, pointing and yelling, the half-eaten dessert plates still on the dining room table. And Sophie, at the very center of it all. Her face, for the first time I could remember, was not smiling. Her eyes were wide with a dawning, animalistic terror. The charm had vanished. Her hands were being wrenched behind her back. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs echoed in my imagination. I could picture the lead agent, the calm voice my father heard on the phone. "Sophie Albright, you are under arrest for the theft of federal property and obstruction of a federal investigation." The room would have gone dead silent, the only sound my mother's ragged sobbing and the final click of the cuffs. "She's crying, Clara," my dad screamed into the phone, his voice thick with tears and rage. "They're taking her away. She's screaming your name. She's—" What did she just say? He was clearly talking to someone else in the room. His voice came back on the line, shaking. "She's yelling, 'You did this? You'd ruin your own family? Answer her, Clara. Did you do this? Did you do this to your own sister? Answer me. I waited. I let the silence stretch, let his frantic accusations hang in the air. After all, we were going to use that for the kids, for their future. It was for family, Clara. And you called these men? He still didn't get it, even then. Even as his favorite daughter was being led away in handcuffs by federal agents from his own living room for a crime he had witnessed and endorsed, he still believed I was the one in the wrong. He still thought Sophie was the victim. He thought the money was the point. He thought I was being petty. He had no concept of the world I lived in, of the laws I had sworn an oath to uphold. He would never understand. I held the phone to my ear, listening to his ragged breathing. The silence on my end was a tangible thing. "Clara!" he roared, his voice cracking. "Say something, anything! You'd destroy your own family?" I repeated her question, my voice low, cold, and as clear as a bell. It was the calmest I had ever felt in my life. "You already did." I pressed the red icon on the screen. I ended the call. I hung up on my father. I then powered the phone down and placed it on the coffee table. The room was perfectly, blessedly silent. The poison was out. The lie was shattered. The perfect family was a myth that had just been publicly debunked. I sat there in the dark, and for the first time since I was a small child, I didn't feel invisible. I felt solid. I felt real. The consequences had arrived, and I was, at long last, safe. I might have slept for an hour, maybe 2. I woke with a start to the bleak gray light of dawn filtering through my window. My first conscious thought was, it's real. It all actually happened. My body felt leaden, as if I were moving through deep water. I forced myself through a routine: coffee, shower. I turned on the morning news. I didn't have to wait long. It was the third story just after a segment on city traffic. And in a shocking development out of the suburbs, the anchorwoman began, her voice grave. Federal agents conducted a raid on a local home last night, taking one woman into custody. They showed a picture of Sophie. It was a professionally taken real estate headshot. She was smiling her brilliant 1,000-watt smile. Sophie Evans Albright, wife of a local real estate developer, was arrested late last night, the anchor continued. She has been charged with felony theft of over $700,000 in protected federal securities. Sources within the Treasury Department indicate the securities were stolen from a close family member, a federal analyst involved in a high-profile case. They didn't use my name? Not yet. But they didn't need to. The chyron at the bottom of the screen screamed, "Prominent realtor arrested in federal theft." My stomach churned. The coffee tasted like acid. I went to my closet and selected my most severe suit, a plain charcoal gray pantsuit with a crisp white shirt. I pulled my hair back into a tight, uncompromising bun. No jewelry, no makeup. I clipped my federal ID badge to the lapel of my blazer. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like a wraith. I looked like a soldier heading into battle. The drive to the office was an eternity. I felt the gaze of every driver in every other car, convinced they all knew I was the family member, the agent who had turned in her own sister. I walked into the formidable lobby of the Treasury building. The security guard at the main desk, a cheerful man named George, who usually had a joke for me, just gave me a solemn nod. His eyes were full of pity. "Analyst Evans," he said, his voice flat. He didn't smile. I walked through the metal detectors. The usual morning buzz in the atrium was gone. As I walked toward the secure elevators, conversations died. I heard keyboards clattering, then stopping. I could feel the weight of their stares on my back. I could practically hear the whispers igniting in my wake. That's her own sister. Can you imagine? I sat down at my desk. My computer screen was dark. I powered it on, opened my email, and just stared at the inbox. I didn't know what to do next. I was the victim of a crime, but I was also a spectacle. I was the nexus of the office gossip. My colleague Maria from the adjacent cubicle approached my desk tentatively. She was holding 2 mugs of coffee. She placed one on my desk without a word. "Clara," she whispered, her voice full of sympathy. I saw the news. Are you?" She trailed off, unable to form the question. "I'm fine," I said. My voice came out as a croak. I cleared my throat. "I'm fine. I have work to do." Maria looked at me, her face a mess of conflicting emotions. She wanted to offer a hug. She wanted to ask a million questions. I could see it all in her eyes. I just kept my gaze fixed on my monitor, offering her nothing. I had nothing left to give. She eventually retreated to her own desk, looking wounded. The isolation was absolute. I was on an island of my own making. An email alert chimed. It was from Director Morales. Subject, Evans. The body was 2 words. "My office, now." I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. The walk to his corner office felt like crossing a desert. I knocked on the heavy oak door. "Come in." I entered and closed the door behind me. He was standing by the window, his back to me, looking out over the city. "You're a pariah, Evans," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of his position. "I know, sir. Everyone out there is talking. Half of them think you're a hero for upholding your oath. The other half think you're an ice-cold monster who'd have her own family arrested." He finally turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "What do you think, sir?" I asked, my voice quiet. He studied my face for a long moment. "I think you did your job. You reported a Category Alpha breach of federal evidence. You had no other viable legal choice. You did exactly what you were sworn to do." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It felt like a pardon. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," he said grimly. "This is going to get much worse before it gets better. Internal Affairs is going to have you for breakfast. The U.S. Attorney's Office will put you through the ringer. And your family? They're going to try to crucify you. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes, sir," I said, my voice firm. "Good." He nodded once. "Your security clearance is under provisional review pending the IA investigation. That's standard procedure, but you are not being suspended. You will retain your badge. You will retain your case files. You will come to this office every day and you will perform your duties. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Director. Go." "And, Evans," he added as I reached the door, "try to ignore the whispers. They don't have a clue what it's like." I walked back to my desk, my head held high. His words were a shield. "You did your job." I worked the entire day. I stared at financial ledgers. I traced offshore account numbers. I pretended it was a completely normal day, while my entire world was a raging inferno. When I got home that night, I finally checked my personal phone, which I'd left off all day. The moment I powered it on, it exploded with notifications. 52 missed calls, over 100 text messages. The vast majority were from my father. Others were from numbers I didn't recognize, aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends I hadn't spoken to in a decade, all crawling out of the woodwork to brand me a monster. And then there were the voicemails. I sat on my sofa in the dark, in the exact same spot as the night before. I pressed play on the first one. It was my father. He wasn't yelling this time. It was somehow worse. It was a voice filled with a cold, shaking rage. "Clara, your mother is in the hospital. She collapsed from the stress that you caused. I hope you're proud of yourself. This is a public catastrophe. I have lawyers. Mark has lawyers. You could have handled this discreetly. You could have come to me. We could have fixed it. But no, you had to be selfish. You had to make it public. You had to ruin us. You have embarrassed this entire family. You have embarrassed me. Call me. Call me immediately. We are going to fix what you have broken. He never said Sophie stole. He never said she did anything wrong. He said, I broke it because I had gotten her caught. I deleted the message. The next voicemail was my mother. Her voice was weak, but it was laced with a venom so pure it could strip paint. It was a thin, sharp blade. I don't know what I ever did to raise a child like you. A cold, heartless, empty thing. Your sister, your poor sister Clara, is in a jail cell. A filthy, disgusting jail. She called me. She was sobbing. Her children, her poor babies, were asking where their mommy was. Mark had to tell them she was sick. You did this. You put her there. I don't even know who you are anymore. I hope you're proud of yourself. I hope your precious job was worth it. You have destroyed this family. You have destroyed Sophie. You have destroyed me. There was a long, weeping pause. Don't call this house ever again. You are no longer my daughter. Click. I sat there, the phone heavy in my hand. The silence in my apartment pressed in on me. You are no longer my daughter. The words echoed in the empty room. Some part of me, some old wounded part, should have been screaming, crying, tearing at my hair. But I felt nothing. Just a vast, cold, hollow space where a heart used to be. This wasn't a new wound. This was just the first time she had said the words out loud. I had never truly been her daughter. I had always been Sophie's supporting cast. They weren't ashamed that Sophie had committed a major felony. They were just furious that the world had found out. They were furious at me for being the one to speak the truth. I put the phone down. I turned it off again. My silence was my only response. They had lived their entire lives in a world of loud, charming, self-serving lies. They had used their words and their voices to build a fortress around Sophie, a wall of noise and excuses to ensure the consequences could never reach her. Well, I had found her, and I refused to speak their language. I would not scream. I would not bargain. I would not cry. I would simply be silent. My silence was my truth. It was my power. Let them scream into the void. I was no longer listening. The next 6 months were a surreal blur of legal proceedings. My life was cleaved in two. By day, I was Analyst Evans. I sat at my desk, I compiled my reports, and I did my job. The office whispers eventually faded, replaced by either avoidance or a strange new kind of deference. I passed the internal affairs investigation with flying colors. My clearance was fully restored. I was, in the eyes of the government, officially cleared of any and all wrongdoing. I had simply performed my sworn duty. By night, I was the prosecution's star witness. The case was officially titled United States versus Sophie Evans Albright. My family was firmly on the side of Albright. I was on the side of the United States. The division was now a matter of public record. My parents deployed every weapon in their arsenal. They retained the most expensive, high-profile defense attorney in the state, a man with slicked-back hair and a shark's grin. They attempted to contact me, not to apologize, but to pressure me into changing my story. My father left me one final voicemail before the trial commenced. Clara, his voice was strained, artificial. The lawyer says this is all just a terrible misunderstanding, that you had agreed to let Sophie borrow the securities. As a kind of family loan, He says if you would just clarify your testimony, this can all go away. Clara, think about what you're doing. This is your sister's entire life on the line. Don't be so stubborn. Just fix it. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding. He was asking me to commit perjury, to lie under oath in federal court, to incinerate my career and my freedom to save Sophie from the consequences of her own actions. I saved the voicemail. I forwarded it to the U.S. attorney. It was promptly entered into evidence as an attempt at witness tampering. After that, the calls finally stopped. The trial began on a brisk autumn morning. The courtroom was small but packed. The local media was there in force, and my family, my parents, Mark, my aunts, my uncles. They all sat together on the right side of the aisle, a unified wall of simmering resentment, directly behind Sophie. I sat on the left, behind the prosecution's table. Alone, Director Morales sat in the back row, a silent, powerful show of support from the department. Sophie's defense was precisely what I had anticipated. She was the naive victim. She was a loving, simple-minded mother who wouldn't know a bearer bond from a grocery coupon. Her lawyer was a master of performance art. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice as smooth as silk. "This is not a federal criminal case. This is a family squabble, a petty fit of sisterly jealousy. This is a simple misunderstanding, blown wildly out of proportion by a cold, vindictive sibling who has always been envious of our client's happy life." He painted me as a monster, the lonely, bitter, childless career woman, pathologically jealous of her beautiful, beloved sister. Sophie took the stand. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. She wept. She wore a demure gray dress, her vibrant red hair pulled back into a modest bun. She looked small and fragile. I just thought it was her savings," she sobbed into a tissue. "Clara, she's always been so successful. I thought she was setting it aside for us, for my babies, for their college. I was going to throw her a surprise party to thank her. I had no idea they were government things. I would never, ever steal, especially not from my own sister. I love my sister." She turned to me then, her eyes full of fake, pleading tears. "Clara, please tell them this is all just a horrible mistake. I love you." I stared back at her, my face a blank slate. I felt nothing. Her charm had no power over me anymore. The jury, however, was visibly moved. My mother was openly sobbing in the gallery. "My poor baby," she wailed, just loud enough for the jurors to hear. Then it was the prosecution's turn. First, they called a forensic accounting expert from the Treasury. He was a dry, serious man who explained in painstaking detail what the securities were. "These are not savings accounts, ladies and gentlemen," he said, addressing the jury directly. "They are untraceable bearer bonds, a common instrument in high-level money laundering. Their serial numbers have been confirmed. They were key evidence in an active, multi-agency racketeering investigation. Their theft jeopardized a 3-year federal operation. The jury was no longer looking so sympathetic. Then they called me. I walked to the stand, the heat of my family's hatred a palpable force on my back. I swore the oath. The prosecutor kept it simple. "Analyst Evans, could you please describe your home security system for the court? It's a high-definition, cloud-based, motion-activated system. It records and saves all triggered events to a secure off-site server." "And did this system record any activity on the evening of the dinner party?" "It did," I said. 3 weeks before the arrest. I was not home at the time." "Your Honor," the prosecutor announced, "the government would now like to play for the Court Exhibit B, the security footage from Analyst Evans's residence." The courtroom lights dimmed. A large screen flickered to life. The whole court saw it. My private study, my safe, and Sophie. She was not crying. She was not confused. She was smirking. The video showed her confidently trying the combination. Our grandmother's birthday. It worked on the first try. It showed her pulling open the heavy steel door. Her eyes went wide with avarice, like a child on Christmas morning. "Holy crap," she whispered. The sensitive microphone picked it up perfectly. She pulled out the sealed federal envelopes. She laughed, a genuine triumphant laugh. Then she looked directly up, right at the small hidden camera in the corner of the ceiling. She winked, and then she held the envelopes up, fanned them out like a winning hand of poker, and took a selfie with them. The sharp click of her phone's camera shutter was deafening in the silent courtroom. Then she tucked them into her purse and sauntered out of the room. The lights came back on. Sophie's lawyer was ashen-faced. My mother had her hand clamped over her mouth in horror. My father was staring intently at his own hands. And Sophie, she was staring at me. The mask was gone. Her face was a sheet of white. Her eyes were not filled with tears. They were filled with pure, undiluted hatred. She knew it was over. The prosecutor turned to me. "Analyst Evans, is that the sister who you love?" "Objection!" Sophie's lawyer screamed, leaping to his feet. "Sustained," the judge said calmly. "Withdrawn," the prosecutor said, smiling faintly. "No further questions, Your Honor." Sophie's lawyer looked down at his legal pad, covered in 100 pre-written questions. He looked at the faces of the jury. He looked at Sophie's hateful, exposed face. He sighed, a sound of utter defeat. "No questions for this witness, Your Honor." Her charm hadn't just failed. It had been exposed as a calculated, malignant lie. The jury finally saw the real Sophie, the smiling, winking, entitled thief. They saw what I had been forced to see my entire life. We didn't have to wait long. The jury was out for less than 90 minutes. That, the prosecutor murmured to me, was either a very, very good sign for us or a very, very bad one. My stomach was a tangled mess of knots. We all filed back into the tense courtroom. The air was thick and heavy like the moments before a lightning strike. I took my usual seat, second row, left side, alone. My family shuffled in. They looked shattered. My father's expensive suit was rumpled. My mother's eyes were red and swollen, but she wasn't crying anymore. She just looked hollowed out. Lily was brought in by the bailiffs. She was pale, her face a mask of stone. She glanced at me once, her expression unreadable, and then stared straight ahead, clutching her husband Mark's hand. "All rise," the bailiff called. We stood as one. The judge entered. We sat. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The judge asked the room. "We have, Your Honor." The forewoman, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, stood up, holding a slip of paper. My heart was pounding against my ribs so hard I thought they might crack. "On the charge of felony theft of federal property, how do you find the defendant?" "Guilty." A noise like a wounded animal escaped my mother's lips. A thin, reedy wail. "On the charge of obstruction of a federal investigation, how do you find?" "Guilty." My father dropped his head into his hands. "On the charge of interstate transportation of stolen securities, how do you find?" "Guilty." "Guilty on all counts," the forewoman stated, and sat down. The room began to spin. Sophie just stared blankly ahead. She wasn't crying. She was in deep shock. She turned slowly to her lawyer. "What?" she whispered. "What does that mean?" Her lawyer simply closed his briefcase and shook his head. My mother finally broke completely. She let out a full-throated sob, a scream of, "No, no, my baby, no!" 2 bailiffs moved quietly toward her. My father didn't move. He just stared at the polished floor, looking like a statue of a man who had just been told his world was ending. He had built his entire life on a set of family rules, and he had just watched them be annihilated by a set of rules that were real. The judge banged his gavel. "Order! Order in the court!" He looked directly at Sophie, his face a mask of cold fury. "Ms. Albright, please rise." Sophie staggered to her feet, her knees visibly shaking. The judge read from his notes. "This court is not blind to the nuances of this case. We have seen the evidence presented. This was not a misunderstanding. This was an act of profound arrogance, breathtaking greed, and a staggering disrespect for the rule of law. You did not just steal money. You stole critical evidence. You jeopardized the work of dedicated federal agents. You betrayed the trust of your own sister, an officer of the very department from which you stole. And you showed this court, on video, that you felt not one shred of remorse. You were, in fact, proud of your crime." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "This court finds it necessary to make a definitive example. For the charge of theft, this court sentences you to 8 years in a federal correctional facility. For the charge of obstruction, 5 years. These sentences will run concurrently." My mother gasped. "However," the judge continued, his voice dropping, "due to the severe nature of the security breach and the extreme jeopardy in which you placed a federal investigation, this court sees fit to add an additional 4 years to your sentence." My blood ran cold. "The total sentence," the judge declared, his voice booming through the silent room, "is 12 years in federal prison." Lily collapsed. If her lawyer hadn't caught her by the arm, she would have hit the floor. "No," she whimpered. "No, I can't. My children." "Furthermore," the judge said, speaking over her pleas, "you are ordered to pay full restitution to the United States Treasury in the amount of $750,000 and an additional $200,000 in fines." It was a life-ending sentence. 12 years, nearly $1 million. My mother was screaming now, a raw, wordless sound of pure grief. My father was white as a sheet, staring at the judge, his mouth agape. The bailiffs moved in. They pulled Sophie's hands behind her back. The sharp, final click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Sophie finally looked at me. Her face was no longer filled with hate. It was hollow. She looked like a lost child. "Clara," she whispered across the courtroom, "please, help me, please." I looked at her. I looked at my sobbing mother. I looked at my broken father. And I felt seen, not by them. They would never see me. I was seen by the truth. For 32 years, I had been the invisible one, the quiet one, the one whose truth was always drowned out by Sophie's charm and my parents' excuses. Today, in a federal courtroom, the truth was the only thing that mattered. The truth had a voice, and it was loud. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just held my gaze steady, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I was unflinching. The truth was, at last, real. I stood up and I walked out of the courtroom, and I did not look back. 3 years, that's how long it's been. 3 years since I walked out of that courtroom and into a new life. Life, as it turns out, moves on. It has to. The world didn't pause for my family's self-immolation. My work became my life. My life became my work. It was the only place that made sense, the one domain where the rules were clear and the consequences were absolute. I was promoted. Then I was promoted again. The Nightingale case, the one Sophie had nearly destroyed, was ultimately a resounding success. My testimony and the recovery of the bonds turned out to be the final linchpin. It led to 14 high-level arrests and the dismantling of a massive international crime syndicate. My colleagues no longer whispered about me. They saw me for what I was, a good agent. Today was a significant day. I was standing in a formal conference room at headquarters. My suit was immaculate. Director Morales, who was now Deputy Director Morales, stood before me. He was reading from a heavy plaque. "This commendation," he announced, his voice filling the quiet room, "is awarded to Senior Supervisory Analyst Clara Evans." He looked up and smiled at me, a genuine warm smile. It reads, "For exemplary integrity and unwavering adherence to federal duty, for upholding her oath under conditions of extreme personal duress, and for service to the Department of the Treasury that goes above and beyond the call of duty." The room, filled with my colleagues and my team, erupted in applause. I shook his hand as he pinned a new senior-level badge on my jacket. "We're proud of you, Evans," he said, his voice low enough for only me to hear. "Thank you, sir," I replied. I looked out at the sea of friendly faces. Maria, my cubicle mate, was beaming. My entire team was clapping. I saw the 2 empty chairs in the front row, the ones my assistant had reserved by default for family. They were, of course, empty. I hadn't spoken a single word to my parents since the trial. They hadn't come. They hadn't called. They hadn't written. It still stung. A small, dull ache in a place I rarely visited. A scar that sometimes pulled when the weather was cold. But it wasn't an open wound anymore. It wasn't bleeding. I smiled at my colleagues. "Thank you, everyone," I said. "Now let's get back to work." Later that evening, I went home. I made myself a cup of herbal tea. I sorted through my mail, bills, junk mail, a catalog, and a single hand-addressed letter. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Sophie's. The return address was FCI Cumberland, Federal Correctional Institution. The letters arrived like clockwork once a month. I had never opened one, not a single one. But I knew what they said. I could guess the progression. The first year, I'm sure they were filled with vitriol and rage. "You did this to me. I hate you. You are a monster. You ruined my life." The second year, they probably pivoted to bargaining. "I'm sorry. I was stupid. I miss my children so much. Mark is struggling. Can you talk to the parole board for me? Can you tell them it was all a mistake?" Now in year 3, I was sure they were a toxic cocktail of apology and request. I held this one in my hand. It felt thicker than usual. I was tempted, just for a fleeting moment, to tear it open, to see what she had to say, to see if 3 years in a federal penitentiary had finally given her the gift of self-awareness. I could imagine the words, "Dear Clara, I'm a different person now. I've been in therapy. I finally understand the gravity of what I did. I am so, so sorry. I know I can never take it back. It would feel good for a second to read that." But I knew how the letter would inevitably end. And the kids really need new braces. Mark is drowning in the restitution payments. Could you just send a little something? Not for me, for the kids? It would mean the world. She would never change. My family would never change. The only person in that equation who could change was me. And I had. I was no longer the family bank. I was no longer the resource to be plundered. I was no longer Sophie's shadow. I looked at the letter, at my sister's neat, loopy cursive. "Some lessons," I whispered to the empty room, "are meant to remain sealed." I walked into my study. I picked up the heavy-duty cross-cut paper shredder I'd bought myself after the trial. I fed the unopened envelope into the slot. The machine gave a quiet, satisfying whir, and my sister's words turned into 1,000 tiny, unreadable pieces of confetti. I emptied them into the trash. The cycle was broken. My apartment is quiet tonight. It's winter. Fat, heavy snowflakes are falling outside my large living room window, blanketing the city in a clean white shroud. From here, I can see the Capitol dome, lit up and majestic against the dark sky. My new security system, installed by the Treasury's own tactical team after the breach, hums softly by the front door. A small, green, steady light. It's a constant reminder of what happened, but it's also a promise. I am safe now. My parents, they're still alive. They still live in that same house on Willow Creek Lane. Mark and the kids moved in with them after Sophie was sentenced. They couldn't afford their big house anymore. The restitution and fines took everything. I haven't seen them. I haven't spoken to them. But I did do one thing. A year ago, when I moved into this new, more secure building, I mailed them a small, padded envelope. Inside, there was no note, no letter, no explanation. There was just a single, simple, spare key to my apartment, a plain, brass key. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a test. It was a statement. It was my way of telling them, I am not the one who locked you out. I am not the one who is hiding. The door is not barred by me. It is barred by you. They have never used it. They have never even acknowledged its receipt. I know exactly where that key is right now. It's sitting in the back of the junk drawer in my old kitchen, buried under old stamps and dried up pens. That key is the only apology I will ever receive from them. It's their silent admission that they know. They know what they did. They know they cannot be trusted. They know they no longer deserve a place in my life. And I accept that. I stand by the window, holding my warm mug of tea, and look at my reflection in the dark glass. A woman, 35 years old now, calm. Her eyes are steady. For so long, silence was my enemy. Silence was the empty chair at the dinner table. Silence was the feeling of being invisible. Silence was the ache of not being heard. But not anymore. This silence, this is different. This is my silence. I own it. It's the silence of a clean, orderly apartment, the silence of a secure lock, the silence of a phone that doesn't ring with anger and demands. It is the profound silence that follows after the truth has finally been spoken. You can forgive, I whisper to my reflection, without reopening the door. I have forgiven them. I had to. The anger was too heavy a burden to carry forever. But forgiveness does not mean amnesia. It does not mean trusting them again. It does not mean I have to let them back into my life to hurt me. I take a sip of my tea. The snow falls. The city is quiet. And in this silence, I decide it's not loneliness. It's peace.